Sustainable You is a casual, interactive, yet informative series detailing and cataloging the sustainability experience. Moreover, this is a short podcast docuseries detailing the thoughts and experiences of passionate advocates towards all things eco-friendly. Our journey is to know how and why understanding sustainable development towards the triple bottom line of people, profit, and planet can contribute to a more mindful, holistic, and inclusive world. Specifically, this podcast showcases what makes you a changemaker, innovator, and transformer as you tackle sustainability challenges for current and future generations to resolve the so-called wicked problems. So today we had the opportunity to be more experimental in addressing sustainable development, gender equality, and environmentalism. I sat down for a conversation with a researcher from my own alma mater at the University of Calgary. Professor Joe Kadi, a researcher based in the Gender and Sexuality Studies department, whose research focuses on intersectional feminism, environmental issues, and social justice and community, gave us an intriguing perspective. One of the more popular fan-favorite courses in gender studies at the university chosen by students is Ecofeminism, a course that has been taught by him as he utilizes experimental and interactive role-play learning to engage students to understand the more than human world. For today's episode, I learned more about ecofeminism and how it challenges the status quo of the master narrative. It does so by addressing the marginalized and underrepresented othered perspective on the fringes of society, allowing for an ethic of care. So stay tuned and enjoy. Do you actually want to introduce yourself, who you are, and what you do?
My name is Joe Kadi. I live in Treaty 7 territory in the northern piece of Turtle Island. I really love the land here. I feel very blessed that I live here. I'm an educator. I would describe myself as an educator for social justice. Teach at the University of Calgary in the Gender and Sexuality Studies program.
And before we actually get into the questions, so we're going to get you to choose one adjective from a list I'm going to be sending you. And basically, you choose one word from the list that best describes your persona and depicts basically your persona in regards to your current vocation or your calling and what you do. And it's not necessarily to typecast you as being personality type A or B, but we just kind of want to know how it aligns with like your values and all.
I'm really not sure, Rachni. They don't. I mean, I suppose the two that come the closest would be gentle. And, well, why don't we say gentle? I'm not really sure that's exactly right, but it's close enough. And I understand you need something to start with. So we'll start there.
Okay. And why did you choose that?
It's probably because it's the closest word. Like, you don't have the word kind on the list. And I think if that word had been there or considerate, to me, it's just really important to treat people and the land and other creatures that we share the land with in a really kind way, in a really considerate way. Those really small ways of being and those small bits of action, those small actions that we take just carry so much weight. And it's a key value of mine to be kind and caring, and it also has something to do with the fact that I'm a transgender man, that I have gone through a gender transition from being assigned the female gender to coming into my own true self as a man. And it's given me a lot of opportunities for thinking about the kind of man I want to be, especially when there's so much misogyny and toxic masculinity around. So I wanted to sort of strengthen that way of being in the world.
No, thank you for sharing. And I like the feedback. I'll definitely consider like those words that you mentioned, adding them to the list, because no one has mentioned that. And this list isn't all, encompassing, but I like that. Maybe I'll add kind to it. That's a good point.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, great. And just in regards to that, what makes you uncertain and what makes you curious?
What makes me uncertain? You mean how to be kind? Like what's uncertain?
Yeah.
Well, you can't know for sure how you're coming across to folks, right? You can't, your actions can be really easily misinterpreted. Like, I'll give you an example. So I was driving in Calgary yesterday and I pulled up to a four-way stop at the same time as a person in another car pulled up to the four-way stop, and I read the other person as a woman, and I smiled and waved for her to go first, because not because she was a woman, I would have done it whoever was there, but just because I was like, you go ahead. That seemed to me a considerate thing to do. And she mouthed the words F off and sort of squealed through the intersection. And I was like, I was just bewildered. I had no idea what had just happened. I was absolutely, and I thought, okay, I thought I was doing a considerate thing, and the way people take things, I guess there's uncertainty around that. I guess you can hope you're being read correctly and hope you're being interpreted correctly, but you might not be. And curious, yeah, I'm a curious person. I like to talk to folks. I like to look closely at the natural world, at the more than human world, to use the better term than natural, and to notice everything I can notice, to learn what I can learn, to ask people questions, and to tune in enough to the more than human world to get information and get details that might be new to me or might give me a different way of understanding something. So yeah, I like learning from the other beings in the world around me, and I like to focus on them enough, whether it's a verbal focus or a nonverbal focus, that I can learn from them. I just think there's so much I don't know, and there's so much to tune into. So yeah, I guess that's how I would answer that question.
Okay, great. Thank you for that. And just to get to know you a little bit more now, so tell me about you, your struggles, your aspirations and contributions, I guess, that led to you to get involved in academia, particularly in feminist studies, and even things like climate change initiatives. I guess ecofeminism would be included in that as well.
My ending up at the university was completely unplanned. I've been involved in social justice movements and community organizing and activist work for many, many decades. I've done that kind of grassroots work of organizing for a long time. I did a lot of educational work in that regard, and I really do love that aspect of working with folks who want to gain more awareness and understanding of these issues. So that's really my background. The fact that I ended up at the university teaching was not planned. It really was not planned. I had lived in the U.S. for a dozen years, and when I came back to Canada, I thought I'd end up back in Ontario, which is where I grew up, Southwest Ontario. And instead, I ended up in Alberta, and in fact, living in the mountains in Canmore. And I had a string of some pretty challenging jobs, some pretty difficult, lousy jobs, you might say. And a friend said, why don't you put your name in for adjunct teaching at the university? And I thought, honestly, they probably have many more people and more qualified than I. And it's true, I had teaching experience. It was all community-based, but it was teaching experience. So I did. I put my name in, and I did get adjunct teaching, and it was really great. It was really, there's something about working with the predominantly roughly 20-year-old folks. That's roughly the average age of the folks I work with. And the ones who will come into a program, or perhaps just one course, in Gender and Sexuality Studies are often curious, questioning, thinking a little bit outside the box. Some of them are quite wary and not quite sure if they're in the right place, and I can kind of read that on the first day. But they come. And I think the thing I really love about Gender and Sexuality Studies is that it's so current. It's so relevant. What is happening right now in our world? Do you care? what is happening? Is there something of concern to you? If there is, what might you do to learn about it and to engage with it and perhaps participate in some community of folks who are working on that specific issue and working for something better? So I just find it so, and there's no criticism here of folks in other disciplines that are not quite so current, quite so day to day. It's just that for me, getting this little niche really, really worked. And it was not, for me, there is a continuum from the social justice work, the activist work that I have been doing since my 20s, and what I'm doing in the classroom. And that's why I really like the term educating for social justice, because it really encompasses that broader understanding. People get very hung up on gender studies and gender and sexuality studies, and often, have very mistaken preconceived notions about it. So I have to kind of figure out little elevator pitches to explain things to people what I do, so that they're not like running screaming in the other direction.
Okay. Just on that, what motivates you to continue in this field of social justice? Is there particular satisfactions and dissatisfactions connected with gender studies? Is there, I guess, aspect that you find challenging? Some mention, for example, burnout. But in your opinion, what do you, I guess, experience the most?
I mean, motivation. I think honestly, Rach Nietzsche, there are such serious, painful things happening in our world, happening to the land, happening to marginalized communities, including mine. It's painful for someone who's tuned into it, which I am. And I need and want to be doing something to counter that. And this allows me to do that. And that is why it is so significant to me. Is it difficult? I think it's very difficult for people who are tuned in right now. I think it's extremely difficult for people who are tuned in to Mother Earth and the suffering that human-induced actions are causing. I think it is painful for tuned-in people to understand what is happening in Palestine and in Sudan, what is happening here on Turtle Island, what is happening in the southern part of Turtle Island right now, which started in a very formal way this week. And I think it's a difficult and painful time to be a tuned-in person. And in the same breath, I have to say, the best way I understand to deal with that is to be part of the very large community of folks attempting to right these wrongs and transform our world, and to do my small part in that process.
Okay, great. No, thanks for sharing that. And now to get more into, I guess, what you do. So overall, just for our listeners out there who might not know, how are gender studies, including feminism and concepts such as intersectionality, related to sustainable development, in your opinion?
Well, gender studies, to me, one of the absolute strengths and beauties of gender studies is that it's an intersectional discipline. It's a holistic discipline. It's a way of examining our world and the structures in our world in this very multi-layered way. That, we could never talk about gender and not talk about race. We could never talk about sexuality and not talk about disability. For myself, I could never talk about gender and race and class and leave out Mother Earth and leave out our home, leave out the land, the water, the air that is what's keeping us alive. That would make zero sense to me. So there's definitely a deep appreciation that I hold for a discipline and a way of examining the world that is at its absolute heart and essence intersectional and holistic. Always asking the question, what else do I need to know? Always asking the question, what other layer of understanding do I need? What other pieces of context do I need to add to what I already know?
Great. And what would you say is your research's core values and intent? Is there almost a basic philosophy that you go by?
I think it really is what I just said, that it's holistic and intersectional, that it's never simplistic, and it's really never done. I worked very diligently in my early years as an activist. I benefited so much from being part of the second wave of feminism, part of the peace movement, peace and disarmament movement, part of a movement that was working for Palestinian solidarity a long time ago, as those of us in the Swana community have been for so many decades, that those movements were where I really got my education in understanding what intersectionality is really about, and how you want to have that depth of understanding so that you can really integrate all of these necessary elements into your thinking and your action and your strategizing.
We can go a bit more into what ecofeminism is all about and its origins. So how did this concept emerge and the movement begin? Do you want to talk about, I guess, some of its key principles? Because for me, I personally first learned of it when I came across your course at the Women's Center at U of C, and then I was really fascinated by it and influenced me in grad school. So I guess for our listeners out there, do you want to talk more about that?
Sure. And I think I do have to laugh a little bit, because I don't think I could pinpoint, I don't think anybody could really pinpoint where and when it started, because you find these traces. So let me explain what I mean by that. But first I'll say, what is ecofeminism? Ecofeminism is a movement, a social change movement for ecological justice and social justice. So I love that short definition. I mean, it's the definition I use. It combines, you can see everything that's in there. You can see that in the word movement, you automatically start thinking, oh, movement, oh, community, oh, social change, community organizing. Then you look at ecological justice and you're like, okay, I might not exactly know what that is, but I know it's got to be about land, water, air, the creatures of our world that we share this beautiful home with. Ecological justice. Oh my gosh, what would justice look like right now for those creatures, for the watersheds and the waterways? And social justice. Well, I know what social justice is because I've taken another gender studies course, and we talked about the importance of working against sexism and racism and ableism and classism, how to make better communities for all of us on this planet. And then you're putting all those things together. And I think that definition is so strong because it brings in everything. It brings in the joining. You know, there's been critiques of some environmental groups that they're not focused on people as much as they are on land. Now, some of those criticisms of some groups, I would say, are absolutely justified. Other times I'm like, nah, I don't actually think that's an appropriate criticism of this group, even though they may not be using the same language that I would use to explain what my concern is or what a particular group is doing. There, you can see it if you look hard enough that there is a concern that goes further than thinking solely about one issue. So, ecofeminism, a movement for social justice and ecological justice. You could also describe it as intersectional environmentalism. This is a term that Leah Thomas uses. It is the title of her book. Leah Thomas, an activist from the U.S., a Black woman, a very intelligent, caring, compassionate community organizer who is, again, just pulling together all of these multi-layers and coming up with a very holistic way of looking around and figuring out these issues having to do with environment are absolutely connected to what's happening to Black folks right now. there's a connection there. Oh, the climate crisis, the refugee crisis that is occurring in part, not in whole, but in part because of folks uprooted from their homelands. Right, social justice. So you might use the term intersectional environmentalism. Certainly I bring a lot of Indigenous thinkers and strategists and activists into the ecofeminism course, the Indigenous wisdom. I mean, the Indigenous nations, the thinking of Indigenous nations, the understanding that Indigenous nations hold and have held since time immemorial, to use their phrase, is a completely integrated understanding that you cannot care for the land without caring for your people, without caring for your creatures that share your land with you. So I'm bringing all of these elements in. And, you know, right, I honestly, I don't care what term people use. I don't care. I don't care if they say the term ecofeminism is not my term. It doesn't work for me. I don't care. I do care that my students leave that course with that understanding and bringing in that awareness of Mother Earth and the more than human world into their consciousness. I start the course with a reading, a book, a novel, a work of fiction by Zain Jukadar. So I am part of the Swana community, Swana standing for Southwest Asian and North African community. I am Lebanese Canadian. Part of my work as an educator is to raise awareness about anti-Arab racism and in particular about the genocide in Palestine. And one of the things that I'm quite committed to is bringing Swana authors in. So Zain Jukadar's novel, as soon as I read it, I was like, oh my gosh, this is perfect for the start of ecofeminism. Why? Because it's a novel that is completely intersectional. You find that integration of the more than human world is in there. It's Zain does it brilliantly. He does it through bringing in birds. The birds are all through the book, all kinds of birds and bird experiences and bird events are as crucial to the plot line, to the storyline as any of the main characters. So right away, I'm thinking as I'm reading this for the first time, how brilliantly it was done and how perfect it would be for this course. Zain, as a trans writer, is bringing issues of gender in terms of the main character. Well, yes, I guess you would say the main character, trans, that we've got this beautiful exploration of the Arab immigrant experience to the United States. That's part and parcel of it. We've got class issues, we've got race issues, gender, and the history all woven through in this incredible way, in this very intersectional way. And it's so, you can't miss it. Even though you're reading this great story, this engaging story that takes you right inside of it, and still you're like, I think I'm starting to see what Joe is talking about with intersectionality, with social justice and ecological justice, with the way to integrate the more than human world into my daily understanding, because it's happening here in this novel. I don't think I said the name of the novel. It's The 30 Names of Night, and I would highly recommend it to everyone, yourself, Rachel, and anybody who's listening.
Hey, great. Yeah, I'll be sure to look that up. Thank you for that. And just to ask, I don't think I asked, how did you first get involved? Like, what prompted you to get, I guess, to focus your research on this particular area? Like, I know you said you worked at a bunch of jobs, but I'm guessing this happened after the fact.
I think that I do feel fortunate that even as a child, I loved being outside. I loved the little creeks and streams. I loved snakes and the little creatures that I would find. My grandmother had brought from Lebanon that real sense of love of land. She had this incredible garden. That was her thing. And I remember just being out in that garden with her. In fact, I've got a photo of my grandmother and I think I'm about 10 and we're in the garden. And it's just sort of perfect because that's where I remember her. She could grow anything. In fact, when my cousins and I were smoking pot in high school, which was not legal at that point, and she was quite fascinated by the whole thing and wanted to grow a marijuana plant, which my cousin provided her with, and she grew it out on her little front yard garden. It grew very healthy, and then it was gone one night, and we were never sure if it was the guy next door, who we always thought it was him, but it might have been one of my uncles who was like, okay, this is ridiculous. My mother is going to be arrested or charged with something for having this very healthy marijuana plant in the front yard. Anyway, I'm a bit off topic here, but I had those feelings, and I had them as through my adult, that love of the land, the love of being outside, the feeling I would get from being in a forest or being at a beautiful lake. I guess it was really through a couple of friends who are ecologists themselves. That is their job. And I had a very vague understanding, as well as my own feelings of love, but I had a very vague understanding of how fraught things were with the more than human world, how damaged it was due to human interaction. But until you hang out with a couple of ecologists who have a very, very, very clear understanding of just how fraught the situation is, you don't know. And boy, that was an education, and it was a hard education. And I think that's partly why I have so much respect for folks who work as ecologists, as conservation biologists, as forest managers, as national parks people trying to care for and keep our national parks healthy and strong. They have a very deep understanding of how serious the crisis is, and they still go to work every day. So yeah, the time I spent with them, and it was toward the end of my time. I think I mentioned I lived 12 years in the US. It was near the end of my time there. And I started reading more when I came back to Canada. I really started reading some of the books they had recommended, and I got that very accurate knowledge base, I might say, about the climate crisis, about the loss of biodiversity, about the length of time that folks working in these fields have been saying the same things, and we're not getting the uptake they should have gotten. I mean, they were talking about the climate crisis in the 80s, and if they had gotten the uptake then that they should have gotten, we'd be in a very different place right now. So it was a sobering education. And what I realized was, and I could see from the books and the folks I was learning from, that they were not separating these issues from the struggles against racism, the struggles against misogyny. They were making very deep connections. So I started bringing environmental issues into my classes. I started bringing another layer, another dimension of this important work into my classes. It fits well. I think the first one was my gender and pop culture class, which I thankfully don't teach anymore because, trust me, I am way out of the pop culture loop. I rely on my students to keep me semi-informed about what's happening, but that is not my field, and I'm too old to be like, I have no idea what you're talking about. But do environmental issues fit within a pop culture framework? Of course they do, mostly because I can point out a million ways that the environmental issues are dismissed and trivialized and minimized in most pop culture. I brought it into the intro class where we lay out what is gender and sexuality studies about, what does this term intersectionality mean, how do we understand it? I brought it into history courses, into the feminist theorizing courses, because there's all kinds of feminist work being done on ways to integrate these issues into our thinking and action about gender and sexuality and race. And when I was given the opportunity, every so often we get offered the opportunity as teachers at the university to come up with a new course. And it happened, oh gosh, I suppose I should have looked this up before we started talking, Rachneet. Because I can't remember the first time I taught it. I know it was before COVID. And as soon as I was offered the course, I knew what I wanted it to be, that it would be on ecofeminism, and that I would attempt to bring this integrated understanding of the more than human world and the human world into the classroom. That I would do my best to, typically it's about helping folks reconnect with that more than human world, because of course one of the reasons we're in the crisis we're in is because so many folks, especially in the, global north or developed world or whatever inadequate term I might use, especially folks in this part of the globe, have really lost that connection. And I do believe, as do other folks working on these issues, that part of the way to rectify the situation, to deal with the crisis at hand, is through the reconnection, the feeling, the love that tends to come to us when we have that outside time, when we have that awareness of the beauty and the power of what is around us. So I try to integrate, we spend a lot of time outside in the ecofeminism class. We walk around our campus. We do writing exercises outside. We take note of the tree species. We take note of the bird species on the campus. We go to the community garden. Most of my students didn't know there even is a community garden on our campus. We talk to folks at the Office of Sustainability on campus, which is a group that is doing such important work and that many of our students have no idea is there, doesn't even know what it's about and what great work they're doing. So all of that is what I try to integrate into this course. And I guess there's one other thing that I think is extremely important that I figured out early on with this course, and that is the importance of giving equal time in the course to the unprecedented amount of social change work, of activist work, of community organizing work that is happening around the globe to deal with the climate crisis, to deal with this ecological damage, because it is unprecedented. And the response is very heartwarming, very inspiring. You can look anywhere at any country, at any little nook and cranny of Mother Earth, and you will find folks caring and working and striving to transform the way we're living and to care for the earth. It's happening. Now, the reason that this is absolutely key and has to get equal time with teaching students about the gravity of the situation is that it is extremely easy to overwhelm people. I mean, if you're only going to give them the harsh reality about the damage that has been done and continues to be done by the human-induced damage, the human reliance on fossil fuels, if that is the focus, you will depress the hell out of people very quickly. And you may well end up immobilizing people rather than encouraging and guiding folks into action, into finding the group, the community, the way of living that speaks to them, that is also much more in line with addressing the climate crisis. So both things have to happen. And it's something I take very seriously because I've seen it, I've felt it myself, I've been part of learning experiences that were very much focused on the gravity of the crisis, and it is really a harsh reality. So we've got to be very strategic about how we educate and what go to bring in a very holistic perspective, because I think it is absolutely crucial to bring in what is happening and the kind of unprecedented response globally that we are seeing.
Okay, great. No, yeah, that was very insightful. And just to backtrack a bit, so I didn't ask your personal definition of sustainability. So do you want to provide, I guess, your take on what sustainable development is? How do you personally view it, especially, I guess, in the context of climate change advocacy? Is there a particular SDG you advocate for? And just on the second part of the question, do you find that these metrics still hold merit? So, for example, being in Sweden in grad school, we had learned that there was a lot of backlash towards it. It wasn't like how it was at U of C, where they're kind of advocating for it almost, because again, the whole SDGs, they buy into the whole idea of the Anthropocene. And as you had mentioned, they don't really take that inclusive perspective, that biocentric perspective of all flora and fauna. And of course, they don't mention things like degrowth and stuff like that. But do you want to speak to your definition? I'd be curious to learn what it is.
Okay, so sustainable development, what do I think about it? What elements go into it? For me, it's that it's kind of a historical arc. It's kind of has to do with time, because what it has to do with, if you're thinking about sustainability, you are taking the future very seriously. And you are considering, what will this project do, not just now, but 10 years from now? What about the next generation from now? What about 3 generations from now? You are doing this it's a hard thing to do, to think in a way that goes far beyond the present moment. And it's not about worry about the future, which I know a lot of people struggle with. I don't mean that. It's really a way of thinking. And I know that, again, to come back to the wisdom of Indigenous nations who had that perspective, who were thinking very specifically, if we were to do this now, how will that work for our generations to come? And you contrast that with, for example, the quarterly report. That's the capitalist mainstay. Yeah, quarterly report, like 3 months, is really going to tell us much. So certainly for sustainable development, is it coming from the community affected? Are they in charge? Have they made the key decisions or been involved in a significant way in the key decisions? Why do they want it? How is the future being aligned with this project? Does it make sense? Those are some of the questions I ask. And, I appreciate the work of the UN in so many ways. It really alarms me to see the misinformation and disinformation about the United Nations that's going on right now. And certainly the set of sustainable development goals has a lot to offer and is one of the frameworks that's been taken up by lots of groups around the world that it works for them. It's not the one I typically focus on, because I've just found this niche with the word ecofeminism, with the term intersectional environmentalist, and with my, as I said earlier, Rachneet, I'm not really that concerned about which framework my students end up using. I'm more concerned about them having an integrated understanding and figuring out how they might participate in the work that's happening right now.
No, thank you for sharing your definitions. Definitely interesting to hear your take on that. And now we're just going to go a bit more into, I guess, more eco-feminist based concepts. I'll just read out the questions here, and then you can give us your perspective on that. So for the first one, it'd be bodily senses. And again, these are just different recurring themes. How does ecofeminism contribute to a life-sustaining society in the context of our dominant narrative that you've also been mentioning of hyperconsumption and commodity consumption, and of course toxic masculinity?
One of the things that ecofeminism does, one of the issues that we talk about in our ecofeminism class about values. And I think that's a really important discussion to have. You can talk about your personal values, and you can talk about values that you wish the larger society had. And of course, if you wish the larger society had the values, you would be including yourself in that. And then you think about whether this is a value that aligns with ecofeminism. So, for example, you think about that beautiful idea of the light footprint, the light step on the earth, which means that instead of the carbon footprint of your own life or your family's life being a high carbon footprint that is using up quite a significant amount of non-renewable resources, you think about the light step on the earth. You think about, what does that mean for me? How do I have the light imprint? Wow, well, I already ride my bike 6 months of the year. Oh, that's a contribution. What if the larger community was doing more bike riding? What about infrastructure for bike riders? That works well with what we're learning about how we've got to get off the fossil burning fuels. We've got to get out of the cars. All these things are connected. Consumerism. Is consumerism part of the light footprint on Mother Earth? Well, there's ways to have a light footprint, because how many clothes do I need? Why am I being sold these ideas that I need a crammed closet full of clothes? I still remember the time I didn't know what a walk-in closet was until I must have been in my 30s, and I was in somebody's house. It was a friend of a friend of a friend, family member that we were staying with for a short time on our way through somewhere. And they were showing us their house and this walk-in closet. It was a room. It was a room filled with clothes for 2 people. It was so shocking. And they were not shocked. They were just like showing us the house. And I know that's how a lot of people live. Is it making them happy? Is it in line with their values? When you raise these questions and you point things out to a group of bright, caring 20-year-olds, the lights go on. I'm not saying that many of them are quite fashion conscious, but they're not, they're understanding what I'm saying. There's so many overlaps. You think about the idea of the light footprint. You think about the idea of paying attention, which is another issue that we stress over and over again in ecofeminism. Pay attention, go outside and look around. Don't just mindlessly walk, not even aware of your surroundings, but to pay attention. Oh, what makes me happy? Why did I feel happier having a real conversation with a friend than I did when I went to the mall for 3 hours? So there's all kinds of ways that this issue spills over into daily life. And you might not call it that. I don't say, oh, we're going to talk about the evils of overconsumption and the capitalist economy and figure out ways to stop buying into it literally and figuratively. I don't say that, but you don't have to say it, because it's clear it's clear where you're going with it, and you're opening up an invitation, and they're taking it or they're not taking it. I mean, I have no control over whether they take it or not, but a lot of them do.
Yeah, no, it's a very valid point of living more mindfully and minimalist, having that sort of more of a simple lifestyle in that sense. And on this next theme, so now this is more about the era of radical uncertainty. So why is it difficult and important to transform from an industrial growth society to a life-sustaining society, especially through an ethic of care? And you had mentioned a little bit about it, but if you want to go more in depth, that would be good.
Why going from an industrial society to a sort of simpler, more sustainable way of living? Got it. Okay. Well, I mean, There's two reasons I would answer that by saying there's two reasons, and I would not give one precedence over the other. I think they both hold equal weight. First of all, people are happier when they live more simply. People are happier outside of consumption, outside of gross search for status and prestige. They're happier when the focus is on relationships with self, with others, with land and Mother Earth. They're happier. The happiness studies, I can't quote them word for word, but I got the gist of them. And it's really clear. The gist is that the people who have relationships and connections are happy people. The people who are lost in that search, unending search, because there's no stopping point. That's the thing about capitalism. There's no stopping point. You're not satisfied when you get to whatever you get to. You've got to go beyond. The happiness studies make it clear, but just from me looking around at the people I know and the people I've tracked through their lives and seen the kind of contentment that they espouse, it's clear. So there's one reason. The second reason is we will kill ourselves off. We're not going to kill the planet. People will use that term inaccurately and they'll say we're killing the planet. Well, we are damaging Mother Earth. We are hurting Mother Earth. We are killing off species. We will never kill Mother Earth because we will be gone way before that happens because we will have killed ourselves off. If we continue living the way we're living, if we continue burning fossil fuels and pouring greenhouse gases into the atmosphere, we're now up somewhere around 450 parts per million of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. The safe number, which is a fact, it is a scientific fact, it is not my opinion, the safe number is 350 parts per million. We are over that. We are in the middle of a climate crisis that is worsening by the day, and we will kill ourselves off because we will not be able to live when we can't breathe and when the fires are raging around us or the floods are drowning us. So there's both you might say, an ethical reason, the reason for our own happiness and well-being, and there's a strategic reason to change our lifestyle, which is keeping the species not just alive in some dismal, tiny little section of the earth that is fit for humanity to live on, but to keep the human species healthy and alive. Those are both, and those are not my opinions. Those are facts. And the climate scientists, I feel so sorry for them. They've been saying the same thing over and over, and it's not like nobody's listening. Of course, many of us are listening, but the people in power are not giving it the kind of attention it deserves, and I think we're going to see a worsening of that because of what's happening with the recent U.S. election. So that's how I would answer that question.
Okay, great. And now just on this last theme, so this would be the forces of reproduction. So again, this refers to the master narrative, and again, the dualistic divide or dualism of masculinity versus femininity within the Anthropocene. So basically, for those of you who are unaware listening out there, overall, it claims that man is the dominant force through the persuasion of, again, that power and control narrative, these industrial technologies, while emphasizing the counter-argument, the forces of reproduction claims that feminine women are, again, that earth care labor. So the question is, how does ecological modernization and feminism and gender equality play into the idea of sustainability and resolving the climate change crisis? So it would be just nice to hear your perspective basically on the master narrative, and again, how it accepts industrial growth, including, again, the backgrounding and denial of colonialism, because you did mention that a bit before. Like, if you can see that one of the root causes of the environmental crisis is patriarchy, misogyny, against the marginalized others, which would be the forces of reproduction. How can we, I guess, reframe that? And make people more resilient towards the climate change crisis, if that makes sense. So that'd be good to hear your perspective.
I think one thing I could say for sure is that social justice, when we're thinking about social justice, we are thinking and acting in ways that are going to take us away from the sexism, the misogyny, the racism, the ableism, the classism that has plagued us and plagued and damaged and oppressed so many communities and continues to do so. At the same time, right now, we've got enough because there are folks, we're at a sort of interesting phase. We're not where we were in the 1950s with the level of overt sexism and misogyny, although certainly there are people trying to pull us back there. There's been such a shift in so many places and in so many communities, and so many families are living different lives than could ever have been imagined. Folks of color are being heard in some ways and being given positions of significance, if not outright power. There are things happening, and we're seeing evidence of that, along with the pushback. The pushback is real. The resistance is real. But there's been such a steady movement. And I think in a very powerful way, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission in this part of Turtle Island I feel like that has benefited us so strongly. I've been, doing my best to be an ally for Indigenous nations and peoples here. And the difference that I feel and perceive because of that very public experience that the country went through and the opening up of so many possibilities. And this is not to say that there's not a long ways to go. It's not that. There's movement that I perceive that I sure as hell was not perceiving 10 years ago on this particular issue. Even to speak of an issue very close to my heart, the genocide in Palestine. You would never have heard the word Palestine in a news report 10 years ago, 5 years ago. The word itself would not be used. So even right now, the fact that we have more allies, those of us in the Swana community have more allies standing with us than we have ever had. And trust me, there's been very few non-Swana allies we've had around Palestine. That is changing. The use of the word is significant. So we have to see as much as we can of both the painful, oppressive activities still going on and the significant shifts in so many places and in so many communities. We have to hold them both, and it's hard to do, and it's possible to do.
Hey, yeah, no, it's a very valid point that you mentioned about Palestine. And as I mentioned earlier, my first job at university these last few years was working as a news reporter here in Calgary, and it just shocked me because it was right in the thick of when the Ukrainian-Russian war broke out, and of course we had all those anti-vaxxer protests that we had to cover every Sunday. Every Sunday it seemed like some sort of activity was going downtown, which surprised me, which is great. Yeah, I'm sure you remember that.
I do, and you were reporting it, Rachel. Oh my God.
Yeah, I think that's why I probably went back to grad school. I realized it's not for me. Like, I did enjoy it, but like the one thing that you mentioned, which shocked me, and this is what I mean by the disinformation around not just COVID, but what was happening to these communities, was that I remember they would, at the time working in the newsroom, they were like kind of biased towards the Ukrainian and Russian war efforts, like what's happening with those refugees. I'm like, Iran is just as relevant. They didn't want me like doing those stories as much, and it just kind of shocked me. I'm like, this is still happening in our day and age. Yeah, so it's actually very valid that you mentioned that, and I didn't realize until you were pitching and doing these news stories. It's really quite shocking.
Yes, no, and honestly, I mean, of course, the folks in Ukraine needed support. They needed a place to come to. Great. What about the people in Palestine? What about the people in Sudan? Like, we have brought over 100 people from Sudan, where there is something like, I think it's 36 million displaced people. Like, I don't even know if that's the right number, but I think it is. And it's just so outrageous and horrifying. And we've brought 100 of them into Canada. This is our response. I mean, it just, Baker's description, it just, you can't even get your head around it. Where are our morals? Where are our ethics? I mean, we had them. We have them for white people. Why? Like, do we have to go through this excruciating experience and watch anyway? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, no, I think for me, just coming out of university, being so educated, learning things about, ecofeminism and all that, and then you come into a newsroom that's like conservative, and they don't climate change deniers. I'm like, it's real. And it was just shocking for me. It's a good wake-up call. I think you need that first job out of university to be that wake-up call for you. But obviously you want to go out there and do meaningful work.
That's right. Well, I love that you started this podcast. What gave you the idea? Did you just think, I've got to do something that's going to both feed me and the skill set that you have and talk about the things I care about in my own way? What got you here?
It's a good question. So for me, I had started when I was at the Gauntlet volunteering and eventually becoming their editor. This is when campus shut down, 2021. I started the Sustainable U column because I found we didn't have enough news stories on climate action. And then, I of course, did the sustainability studies courses and whatnot. And then for me, I guess the turning point was just kind of working in the newsroom and seeing that there's a lot of these big, mainstream news outlets. So for me, it was like, okay, well, you see, especially a lot of friends, they don't want to work in oil and gas. And I noticed that Alberta, there's a brain drain going on, and a lot of younger people, when they graduate, they're going to other provinces, moving to the States in search of opportunity. And to me, I find that there's an oasis here. There's so much potential here in Calgary, maybe in Alberta, even though we're typecasted as being the more conservative part of the country. And just being abroad and seeing how the educational, they're socially progressive policies. I was surprised to find that they don't pay for their education. Education is free. They have more liberal policies when it comes to mat leave and maternity leave as well. And they just seem a bit more open when it comes to talking about these issues. I would never think that, in a business school curriculum, for example, here at U Calgary, we would never talk about things like the forces of reproduction. It's just not common. Yes. Whereas I was just really impressed just seeing how at Campus Scotland they were very much having that dialogue. And it's not cookie cutter the way I guess business schools in Canada are. So it's a bit more experimental, and I think we should be moving in that direction. I didn't expect to end up working in mainstream media. I didn't really go to school for that. I was in anthropology, so I think a lot of youth maybe they need direction. I came across the Gauntlet last minute, and it was good. It was eye-opening and kind of to learn about that. So I would love to share what happened.
Great. Okay, super. Well, thank you for this. This was a great conversation, and I just thank you.
I just had one more question. Okay, so how does ecofeminism, I guess, socially impact local communities? Because that was just the last response that you had, and I just wanted to follow up. So how does it help those who are overlooked, underrepresented, and marginalized in society? How can we use it to mobilize those who are vulnerable and to give them a sense of agency?
Well, I think that the beauty of ecofeminism is that it's a model, it's a framework, it's a way of being that works in very small ways and very large ways. And when I see, folks in local communities coming together and, to think back, for example, go back to the 90s and we'll go to the rural southern US and we'll go to Black folks who were realizing that corporations were dumping toxic waste, massive amounts of toxic waste in their communities. They were literally looking for places in the rural South inhabited by largely Black folks, not well-off Black folks living in a rural setting. And they had already been using those grounds for toxic waste. And there was a massive toxic waste dump planned for, I can't remember the name of the small town. It was in North Carolina. Anyway, one of the things that came out of that resistance when Black folks came together, they immediately made the link. It was very clear to them that racism and environmental degradation were going hand in hand, had gone hand in hand in all kinds of ways. In other situations, they started mapping it. They literally started mapping it. They started putting maps of where Black rural poor folks were living, overlaid with these massive toxic waste dumps that corporations had planned and were establishing, and they matched. And that's where the term environmental racism came out of that period in the early 80s. And it was all coming out of grassroots, mostly women. I'm not going to say all women. That would not be accurate. But mostly women in the groups doing the strategizing, taking the actions, and sometimes leading the groups and sometimes not perceived. So you've got the issue of gender in there. But there was a real, and there's all kinds of examples like that around the globe. People are figuring it out. Would they use the word ecofeminism? No. Am I putting the word ecofeminism on them? No. Am I saying that there are similarities in the work folks are doing that we see all over the world emerging from local communities who are understanding and utilizing an intersectional framework? And they might not use the word intersectionality, but I see the overlap and I'm paying attention to that. So again, it's not about me naming and saying I know how to define somebody else's work. It's me looking for those places where I see that attention to the need to think intersectionally and holistically, and the need to keep broadening the context and deepening the context. And it is absolutely happening in an abundance of places.
Okay, great. No, it's very insightful. Thanks for sharing your perspective. This last question, and feel free to not answer, it's more of a political question, because I noticed in Sweden, at least here, like the Green Party is not considered like much, like, and it's interesting with the elections coming up, but I was surprised to find that they have this like spectrum of different political parties, and they have the Feminist Party and the Green Party, and they're a bit more legitimate there.
Yes.
Like they're taken more seriously. So are there any do you see anything like potential policy interventions that can promote sustainable practices and trends towards gender equality?
You mean at our political levels, whether at the municipal or the federal or the provincial level? Is that what you mean?
Yeah, so political advocacy at all levels for...
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot I could say about this, and I'll keep it very brief, but partly because it can be tricky. I don't want to get too much into partisan politics, which I know is not what you're asking me. What I see politically speaking is a wide range of things, some of which are so concerning I can hardly explain how concerning they are. The level of hostility and distrust towards almost all politicians is unprecedented. I've been following politics for decades, and I can say I have never seen anything like it. It distresses me beyond belief. And to take for one example, our Calgary mayor, Joe Kadi, who I consider a smart, caring, strategic, and insightful leader at this moment in time, the level of hostility directed towards her it shocks me. It should shock all of us. I don't care if people disagree with her policies, but that's not what they're talking about. I am hearing the most racist, misogynist things being directed at this woman that absolutely shocks me. So first of all, when we think politically, we're thinking, okay, how are there even decent people in politics these days? I mean, honestly, the level of harassment is unprecedented. And then I do think we're seeing I can point to positive developments. I can point to Calgary City Council stating and understanding we are in a climate crisis. That is the word they used. And the city needs to prepare, take action, do what the city can at their smaller level of government to alter the situation, to change policies There's all kinds of things happening at our local level to support the land and to care for our waterways. That is absolutely happening. There are things happening across the country at various provincial governments. I'm not going to name any of them. I don't want to get into that, but there are definitely places provincially and territorially, I think I said that right, where there is very smart strategic action being taken and education happening for citizens. And I would say that the current government in power has taken some positive steps and done some very smart policy work on environmental issues. Is it enough? No. Are there steps in the right direction? Yes. Is it really important for folks to be educated about the various levels of government? Who does what? Who's responsible for what? And why it matters to not just to vote. I mean, of course, I want people to vote. I want them to vote after they learn and study the different candidates and the different parties, not just to listen to what's being said, but to read what the policy decisions would be if a certain government came in. I want them to participate and track what's happening politically. And governments do respond when a certain segment of the population presses them to respond. So there's a lot of places, I think, for more of us common people, and I'm including myself here, to participate in some kind of meaningful way and realize that governments at this point in time need to hear from mature, responsible citizens who have ideas and who want to suggest ideas or support a government who does something well, to kind of step up a little bit more. I think we all need to think about that right now. I think it's extremely important.
Okay, great. And in short, to wrap up our interview, what do you find to be the future vision for both your research and ecofeminism? Do you have any final thoughts you want to share? Maybe something that I missed or we didn't really get to talk about?
Honestly, the thing I would say, Rach, is that I just keep tracking the positive work that's being done, because that is what gives me hope. I keep tracking my students. So many of my students are doing incredible work, both while still in their undergrad and once they have graduated. And I don't mean solely environmental work. I mean work that might be focused on gender-based violence, but they have not forgotten that there's a larger picture here, and they're seeing the larger picture. So I get a lot of hope from tracking the grassroots actions, the cultural work being done. By that I mean the poetry and the music and the art that's coming out around issues of justice for the land, and my students in particular, the individual students that I get to work with.
Okay, great. No, that's sage advice. Thank you so much for attending this. And again, this has been Joe Kadi, a professor at the University of Calgary in the Gender Studies Department. And I wanted to thank you again for participating in Sustainable You.
You are so welcome, Rachel. Thank you for this. It was lovely.
Okay, great.
Thanks so much for tuning in to yet another eye-opening episode of Sustainable You. Again, this is an extraordinary and engaging info series whose purpose is to make sustainable development and sustainability accessible to the average person in their quest to quench their knowledge on environmentalism. Be sure to leave your feedback by liking this week's released edition and by subscribing to this podcast. Again, any love from our followers is much appreciated. Signing off until next time.